Assalamu alaikum, sisters. Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for being here with me today, Coach Fahmeeda. And today we're going to be discussing the topic of mindfulness in relationships. So I'll start with the dua. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. All praise is to Allah. We seek His aid and His assistance and ask His forgiveness. And we seek refuge in Allah from the evil of our souls and from the evil of our actions. Whomever Allah guides, no one will be able to mislead him, and whomever He leads astray, nobody can guide him. I testify that there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah alone without partner, and that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is His slave and messenger. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. O my Lord, open for me my chest, ease my task for me, and remove the impediment from my speech so they may understand what I say. So I just want you, sisters, in the chat box, just to share what you think is the definition of mindfulness. So we've all heard of mindfulness. It's a very common term nowadays, especially. So what do you think mindfulness means? Attaining peace of mind. What else is mindfulness? Being present. Anybody else for mindfulness? Being aware of your emotions, taking your time, being conscious of who you are, engaging with and why. Inshallah. So I'll read what the dictionary definition of mindfulness is. So mindfulness is a mental state achieved by focusing one's awareness on the present moment while calmly acknowledging and accepting one's feelings, thoughts, and bodily sensations. So now I want you to reflect on your relationships and think about your good relationships and what makes them a good relationships, what makes them a good relationship. So what characterizes this relationship to be a positive one for you? So what characteristics does this relationship have, a good relationship?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
So I want you to reflect on your good relationships. So the relationships in your life that you consider to be good, what makes them a good relationship? Respect and sacrifices. What else? What else makes a good relationship? So compromise, listening wholeheartedly, honesty, consideration, being mindful. So these are removing judgments, being there, commitment regardless of the ups and downs, caring for one another, no expectations, giving time. So these are all attributes of a good relationship. So now I want you to do the reverse. So what we consider, quote unquote, a bad relationship. What characterizes a bad relationship? So what do we consider to be a bad relationship? no communication, disrespect, disrespectful, mean, selfish, judgments, lack of consideration for the other, abuse, ignoring. So these are all things that we obviously don't want in our relationships. And we consider them to be characteristics of a bad relationship. Distrust, that's a big one as well. So we all have both good and bad relationships. Some relationships challenge us more than others in our life. And today's session is really for us to ponder upon these relationships, on the state of our part that we play in these relationships, and also the deeper purpose of all relationships, good relationships and the bad relationships. So going back to the definition of mindfulness, do we calmly accept our feelings and thoughts around our relationships, especially the more challenging ones? Or do we wrestle with our feelings and thoughts, and do we try and change our thoughts and feelings by attempting to change our relationship and attempting to change the person in the relationship? So these are all things to kind of reflect on. So I'm going to share a hadith with you that I came across a while back. Try and find the hadith. Amina, sorry, Dr. Amina, do you know where I go for the, oh, I know, sorry, I've got it, share content. There we are. So that's the hadith, and I'll read it to you. So it's, do not be people without minds of your own, saying that if others treat you well, you will treat them well, and that if they do wrong, you will do wrong. Instead, accustom yourselves to do good if people do good, and not do wrong if they do evil. So when I came across this hadith, I was, subhanAllah, really blown away. It's such a beautiful hadith, and it's so applicable in our lives and in our relationships, and making them more mindful. So being more mindful in our relationships. So what does it mean to be without minds? And it really says it in the hadith, really clearly, that if somebody treats you well, if the other person treats you well, then you treat them well back. But if they do you wrong, then you do wrong back. So this is really being without your own mind. It's not using your own mind, because you're under the influence of other people, how other people choose to behave. That, you're using that to choose how you behave. So you're looking to the person, you're looking to the other person in the relationship to base your actions around. So you're not really using your mind, and there's no intention there as well, because you're simply looking to the outward rather than inward condition of yourself. When really our actions should be driven by our own thoughts and our intentions. So this is a really unconscious way of navigating our relationships. Just by looking how somebody else treats us, that's how we'll treat them. So we're running on autopilot, and this unconscious way of being in our relationships is probably what we learn as children very early on. So we've probably been running on this autopilot way from our brain for years and years of our life, from childhood. And it is very childlike behavior. If you look at children, it's very much, tit for tat. He did this to me, so I'm going to do this. So we have probably unconsciously taken this way of thinking and carried this forward in our life. And obviously, now we are accountable for our behavior. When as children we weren't accountable. Now we are accountable because we're adults now, but we're still using the belief patterns that we developed as children. So subhanAllah, this is something that we need to give a lot of consideration to. So unless we, as adults, we regularly inspect and become aware of our thoughts and beliefs of today, in the present day, we could really be living in the past. And obviously this is not just in our mind, but it's having an impact in our actions and our behaviors towards people. So, like the Hadith says, we are then being people without minds. And just today, actually, I came across a post by Omar Suleiman, and he actually said today on this post, let me just try and find it for you. I'm just going to try and find this post for you and just share it with you because it really fits in really well. So the Prophet ﷺ mentioned an angel once stopping a man on his way to visit his brother, asking if there was an ulterior motive behind his visit. And then Omar Suleiman goes on to say, too often acts of kindness come with a catch, and people inquire about others only hoping to acquire something in return. So this is very kind of reciprocal way of being and very transactional way of behaving in relationships, that if somebody benefits you, then you'll be of benefit to them. And of course, we all want to have a relationship where it's fair, there has to be some level of sort of give and take, but this will make the relationship stronger. But then on an extreme level, like I said, it can be quite a childish way, and it's not the way that we really, in today, how we want to be in our present day. It's not how we want to be. So a lot of our relationships, innocently, it could be coming from our ego. So we could be being in a relationship through our ego is very different to being in a relationship seeking the pleasure of Allah. So it's something, like I said, it's very innocent, and it's something that unless we, it's probably running unconsciously, we're not even aware of it. So when we have a relationship through our ego, it's very fragile. The relationship will feel very fragile. You'll need that constant validation, and you'll be seeking your self-worth through this relationship. How the person is treating you, that's how you'll believe your self-worth to be. So it's coming from a place of fear of maybe rejection and abandonment, all of these sorts of issues. But when we have a relationship seeking divine pleasure, this is completely different to a relationship that is pleasurable for our own selves. So especially for the tough and testing relationships, it can feel like there's no pleasure at all in keeping these relationships. But these are the relationships that, that we need to give the most kind of thought to. So when you have good relations with family and friends, it's really easy, maintaining those relationships. It feels, it's a pleasure to be in a relationship like that. You gain love and support, and it's comforting. It feels so good. You don't even need to think about it. It just happens effortlessly. But when you have the tough testing relationships, these are really hard to, hold on to. And it's actually in these types of relationships that we turn to Allah more than when we have the easy, nice feeling relationships. So I'm just going to share another hadith with you that I came across. So this is talking about when, to maintain ties when it's difficult. So the Prophet ﷺ said, the one who maintains a relationship with his relatives only because they maintain a relationship with him is not truly upholding the ties of kinship. The one who truly upholds these ties is the one who does so even if they break off the relationship. So subhanAllah, we can see from this that, you know, when things are easy, we think we're maintaining, you know, ties, but actually it's easy then, you know, it feels comfortable for you, but it's actually the one who's upholding ties when the other person has broken up. This is the true spirit of upholding ties. So when we feel wronged, this is when, you know, we unconsciously could start to reciprocate with unkindness and unjust behavior. And this leads to us becoming people without minds, because we no longer behaving how we truly want to behave, but we behaving more in line with how we've been treated. So no one was good to me, so why should I be good back? You know, if I'm being ignored and mistreated, why should I, you know, be the bigger person? You know, they spoke to me in such a disrespectful way. You know, I have to respond like that, or else I'm going to be perceived as weak. So often we, you know, behave in a way back because we fear that we're going to be seen as weak. We feel like we're being weak if we don't retaliate in some sort of way. And there's another beautiful hadith that we're all familiar with, and it was only recently actually that I came across the next part of the hadith. So we all know this hadith, that charity does not decrease wealth. We all know that hadith, but it goes on to say, no one forgives another, but that Allah increases his honor, and no one humbles himself for the sake of Allah, but that Allah raises his status. So subhanAllah, this is again another beautiful hadith, and it just shows us like where our, you know, strength lies. Where is the power? Like if we think, you know, retaliation, you know, tit for tat sort of behavior is showing, you know, strength, but really when we forgive another, Allah increases our honor. When we humble ourselves for the sake of Allah, you know, we are increasing in, you know, in the eyes of Allah, and this is where our strength lies. This is us using our mind and being who we want to be. So, you know, our ego, when we have a disagreement, our ego wants us to, you know, dig our heels in and kind of prove our point, because it feels like, you know, this is how I'm going to show that I'm strong and somebody can't, you know, mess around with me. But, you know, this isn't true strength. This is actually, you know, weakness. And when we humble ourselves, you know, for the sake of Allah, not for our own pleasure, it doesn't feel good for me, but if I do it for the pleasure of Allah, then, you know, Allah's raising me in my honor, regardless of how somebody treats me. So, you know, it just shows how important it is to know yourself, because if you know yourself, regardless of how somebody else will treat you, you know what, you know, your values are and what you stand for, and your intentions and your goals of who you want to be as a person. And, you know, this reflects, you know, your character. How do you want to develop your character? You know, even in a difficult situation, you know, an altercation, you know, something that doesn't feel really good for you, somebody is putting you down. If you think about your character, how you want to develop your iman and the condition of your heart, and ultimately your relationship with Allah, you can see that, you know, all of these things are focusing on your internal state rather than, you know, the external of how somebody is treating you and the relationship. So, you know, again, it comes back to, like the hadith said, using, you know, our own mind rather than the mind of somebody else to dictate, you know, how we're going to behave in a situation. So I've just got some steps here to kind of break down how, you know, we can do this. So the first step, like I said, is to know yourself. How, you know, steps to navigate the difficult relationships, or even all relationships actually. So the first step is to know yourself and be authentic to yourself. Be, you know, authentic to who you want to be and how you want your relationship to be with Allah. How you want Allah to, you know, placing your self-worth with Allah. So that leads to my next step, which is to separate your self-worth from how you behave or you treat others. So how you behave or what you do for somebody else isn't indicative of your self-worth. So being kind and generous, we can equate that with being, feeling like a doormat, but that's because, it's coming from that place of ego and feeling weak when somebody is mistreating us. But if we doing it for the pleasure of Allah, then we gain our strength from this. So it's, really a reflection of your moral character, and it should be an automatic way for Muslims. Even if you don't personally gain anything, it's still a win-win situation because you're gaining the pleasure of Allah. So the next one, the next step is to separate your self-worth. And this is a really important one. Separate your self-worth from how people treat you. And this is both in the good and the bad. So we don't realize it, but even in our good relationships, if we attribute them for our self-worth, to our self-worth, then even then, it's quite a dangerous place to be, because when those good relationships, they can change at any time. And then what happens then? You're left kind of questioning, what's wrong with me? That's what's going to happen. So your self-worth always lies in your relationship with Allah, what you do for Him. So how somebody treats you, good or bad, this doesn't in any way measure your self-worth. And so when somebody treats us in a way that is hurtful or unkind, this is always a reflection of themselves, because it's their capacity to love. It shows their capacity of their heart, of how much love their heart can hold and how merciful they can be. And as we know, as humans, we're all flawed. Me and you are flawed. We all make mistakes. So this is why it's so important to have that way of forgiveness about us. When somebody wrongs us, that we don't hold on to that we can forgive. And again, that forgiveness is a reflection of what we carry in our hearts. So it always comes back to using our hearts and our minds that Allah has given us. So going back internal rather than looking at the external. So the last step is to establish boundaries. So this in itself is a huge topic, and Coach Fahmeeda did touch, she did her hosting on boundaries last week, I believe. So you might be listening to all of this and think, well, what about people that are really mistreating me, that have, oppressed me? So even in the Hadith, if you look at the end of the Hadith, the word is really interesting how it's been worded. So I'll read the last part. Instead, accustom yourselves to do good if people do good, and not do wrong if they do evil. So that's quite, you can interpret that more broadly than if it had used the word good. So still do good if people do evil, but it says do not do wrong if people do evil. So it's completely fine to establish boundaries and to emotionally separate yourself. So nobody's saying, to be a doormat and to, allow yourself to be oppressed. But again, even establishing boundaries doesn't work by somebody kind of respecting those boundaries. It works by you respecting your own boundaries. It starts from within again. So, it's admitting when something hurts you. It's, allowing yourself, to feel that pain. And if we look at, even the prophets, peace be upon them, they all, felt and expressed their pain. They had, there's so many stories of prophets that had family problems. Like if we look at Yusuf alayhi salam, he was thrown into a well by his own brothers, and his father Yaqub alayhi salam cried so much for him that he became blind. So it shows that feeling hurt is human, and we shouldn't suppress our humanness. After so many trials, if we look at the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, even after all of that, he forgave his brothers, and he was given a position of authority by Allah over his brothers. And this was the justice of Allah, and he would have been so justified to act with revenge, but he didn't, because he wasn't influenced or swayed by what his brothers did to him, but instead he was aware and mindful of Allah in his relationships. And as Muslims, this is what, you know, we have to strive for. And when we look at the lives of the prophets, you know, we've got so many examples there to, you know, comfort us, inshallah. So has anything come up for anybody while I've been sharing this? Because like I said, we're not going to be breaking out today. It's a really big topic, I know, so I've just kind of touched upon it, but does anybody want to share anything?
Can I just say, I think it's really got me thinking about the quality of my relationships and things. Like you really got opened things up that I wouldn't have looked into. So that's really nice. I mean, I just assumed that at the beginning that, oh no, you know, my relationships are a certain way, like there's no catch to them, but it's actually got me thinking that is there, you know, there might be on some level that I didn't even realize. So thank you for that.
Yeah, we all do that, don't we? We all, you know, it doesn't matter how much, you know, self-development work or whatever, you know, we do. We're all human and we all have these tendencies, and it's just about checking our beliefs that we created very early on. Like, are we still living through those beliefs that, you know, that we need to develop? So you're welcome, Jamila.
Yeah. But you don't realize, you just don't get it. Like before, I think when I was a lot younger, I had that thing in me, ingrained in me, where, you know, when people are nice to you and they give you something nice, you have to return that favor. And it was a bit tit for tat, but I just thought that was the norm and everybody did that. And now I've really separated from that, and I can see, because I can just see whatever goodness comes out of relationships, it's really from Allah, and the relationships are a means. It goes that much deeper.
Yeah, definitely. And it just shows that, you know, when we differentiate between the good and the bad relationships, actually all of our relationships are good for us when we are seeking the pleasure of Allah. Like if it's the really nice relationships, you know, the ones that feel good, the comfortable ones, the ones that, you know, you don't need to make any effort, actually, that they're, you know, they don't mean anything about who we are as equally as the relationships that we struggle in as well.
That's so true. That's so true. Even the bad ones, actually, when you can see it from that point, that actually it's been a means of growth and it's taught you so much about yourself. That's a really beautiful thing. And, you know, that helps you let go of, you know, the resentment if they've wronged you in some way.
Yeah, definitely. It's separating who we are from who they are, whoever they is. It's always seeing it as a means of growth, whether, you know, that's growing. You know, it's easy to love somebody that's loving you, but how can you love somebody that's wronging you? Can you forgive that person, or will you carry that in you and let that resentment and that kind of hatred, you know, growing to hatred and growing to enmity, and before you know it, you know, it's, you know, it's our heart that's going to be affected more than the other person.
Yeah, definitely. And even if there isn't a relationship there anymore, that resentment can still stay. But, you know, to get that closure, you have to really understand that there was goodness in that difficult relationship.
Exactly, that's it. And it's constantly, it might not feel like it, but it is changing. But when we use our past lens, you know, childhood is quite an extreme example, but even a relationship from 10 years ago might have changed now. But because we're so fixated on the lens of being wronged, that, you know, we still see it through that lens, but there has been change. Like people change over time. Even the smallest change, but when you focus on that small change, you'll gradually see more positives around you, the positive attributes of a relationship, and you can, you know, change your whole perception of that relationship then.
Yeah.
Does anybody else want to share anything? Thanks, Jamila. Do you want
There's some questions on the chat you might want to answer.
to? Oh, right, yeah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Hope everyone's well. Yeah, this is such a powerful topic, really, really powerful and really important as well. I had a conversation with somebody recently who has to deal with, on a daily basis, with somebody very difficult, the operative, challenging. And basically, the person got COVID, and the person I was speaking to was blamed for COVID. So he said, "Oh, it's your fault, I got COVID." And in that moment, she responded like, "Don't you dare start blaming me," right? In that time. And understandably, you can understand why she might respond like that. Like, don't you dare start blaming me. You know, I had it 3 weeks ago. You know, if you were to get it from me, then you would have got it then. You know, playing your tricks on me again. So, well, what I said to her was, is there any other way that you could have responded? Is there any other thing that you could have said? And she goes, well, no, I don't think there is, because you know, what do you say in that? I said, well, that's the thing. We don't see if there's any other options of something to say. Is there something that that's maybe not, the word I use is inflammatory, like, because when you start, it all depends on your tone, on the words you use, and we don't take stock of our tone, our body language, the words that we use. We just sort of get swept up by the emotion. I said, what if you said something like, well, to be honest, you know, we don't know where we pick up these virus from, and at the end of the day, it's Qadar Allah. And she was like, yeah, she wouldn't really have anything to say back if I had said that.
Yeah, it's
but
blame.
You know, it is, yeah. She was like, you could have said it. But what that how that conversation transpired, what she then confided to me and said is, well, actually, when somebody's not talking nice to you, just don't talk nice back to them. And exactly what you're saying through that hadith. But I sort of suggested to her, well, maybe that's a test. Maybe Allah wants to raise, because this person is a nice person. She's a good person. But maybe Allah wants to raise you in your niceness. Allah wants to raise your position goodness. You don't know. It's like we want to get promoted in our job, but these are our promotions that Allah wants to give us. But we almost see it like, well, I don't want to want to be nice to her.
Yeah.
It's something very important. So yeah, Jazakallah khair.
Barakallah for that, Dr. Amina. Yeah, no, definitely. And I think when we feel blamed, like automatically, like our back goes against the wall, and we, you know, to kind of take that blame away from ourselves, we respond back in a harsh way. And again, it's like you said, it's in every part of our interaction. You know, what we have in our mind, like when we are being mindful, it's in our tone, in our, you know, body language as well. All of this, it's how we want to be, and like you said, it's how Allah wants to raise us. It's like digging almost the goodness out of you, and the relationships that are the testing ones are actually, they're the ones that you have to dig further into yourself to get the goodness out. You know, with the other easy ones, it's all, you know, it's like the fruit that's easy to kind of pick. You know, it's in your reach, but Allah wants you to reach even further to get the, you know, these qualities that He's definitely placed within us, that He wants, you know, for them to grow from us. So there were a couple of other, I think there was a question on, I'm just going to go up. What about when you keep trying to be nice for the sake of Allah and the same person get even worse? So what I would say to that is, what I said earlier on, is that when people treat us in a certain way, it's always about the other person. It's always, you know, it's their ego, and it's where they believe the power lies. So if they believe their power lies in mistreating people, in treading on the rights of people, then they're going to feed their soul with that, and they'll really believe that that's where, you know, the power is coming from, subhanAllah. But what a condition to be in. And when we can see it like that, we almost, when we separate ourselves from that person, we can feel sorry for that person and think, subhanAllah, like, you know, they are really not seeing the truth. They're not seeing the, you know, mercy of Allah, and they're not seeing how, you know, Allah wants us to treat his creation with love and respect. And this is a way of loving Allah. I hope that's answered your question. If anybody else has anything to add to that, please do so. So Neelam, I was wondering how you can hold onto your self-worth and not get too involved when people are good for you. One idea was that Allah has made these people be merciful to me, but I'm not sure if there's any stronger argument to this. Definitely, I think when people are good to us, this in some ways is a bigger test for us, because like I said, it's in the times of hardship that we remember Allah naturally more, and we turn to Allah to ask for his help. But when things are going good, it's almost like, I don't need any help, I'm okay here. So it's a greater test actually to have these blessings and to be thankful than to be patient when you're going through difficulties. So again, it's, you know, it's exactly the same. So it's being mindful of all relationships. So it's, you know, thanking Allah, attributing the goodness of this relationship back to Allah. It doesn't mean anything about your self-worth, because if self-worth was reflected in relationships, the Prophet ﷺ had the most difficult relationships to manage. So having loving spouse or loving family or loving friends or siblings, this isn't indicative of what Allah thinks about you. Or having children, you know, this isn't, you know, sometimes Allah tests us with these very things and we're not even aware of the test. So isn't it better, what I think anyway, my reflections, to be aware of difficulties? It's almost like when you've got it so good and so easy, it's almost like a veil is over your eyes and you're not seeing the test. What else is there? It's true, sister. I had going through arguments and disputes for 5 years, but one day I say qadar to Allah. I just decided to accept my situation, let everything go as it was supposed to be. I saw it as a test and started to thank him. The truth is, since then, I have become a better person regarding my deen, and even the relationship has become stronger, become better. So this hardship I was going through was a blessing from Allah, because it makes me part of those ones surrounding to Allah for everything. So, yep, so turning to Allah, you know, in our hardships, and, you know, just letting go, just like, you know, the meaning of mindfulness, calmly acknowledging and accepting and letting go of, you know, how we think things should be, just accepting every moment that arises. And is there anybody else that would like to say anything? Alaikum salam.
Yes, I just wanted to add.
I can't hear you, sister. Your volume's really low.
Can you hear me now?
I can't, I'm afraid. Could you put your volume up?
Can you hear me now, sister?
Sorry, sister, I can't hear you. Would you like to type it in and then I can answer your question? Anybody else like to say anything? Anything that has shifted for you, perhaps? Anything you've reflected on in a different way?
Assalamu alaikum, sister. Are you able to hear me now?
I can. Walaikum salam.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to say thank you for the session. It was really lovely. And for me, I think I can honestly say that if you do something for the sake of Allah and you remain patient, you do see the real fruits at the end of it. And for me, I can actually say that I have actually seen one of them, especially when it comes to the relationships between a child and their father, if you are separated or divorced. I think it's really important that for me, I made sure that regardless what happened in my own situation, that my son would have his relationship with his dad, regardless of distance or anything. And I've maintained patience, alhamdulillah. It was just something within me that I did not want to see a child without their dad. I didn't experience that, and I didn't want my child to experience that, although he was slightly in a different situation. And for my child to look at me today in the eye and say, thank you, you're the best mum and he's the best dad, and I couldn't have anything better. For me, that's really amazing, alhamdulillah. And my child sort of grew up not even knowing that we were divorced. He was only when I told him that he found out, and he didn't, because the relationship was so good between him, his dad, and myself, he didn't realize that he was in that situation. It was only when I told him that he found out. Obviously, it took him a while to process everything because of his age, but he's alhamdulillah, just for him to look at you in the eye and say thank you, you've done everything you can possibly do for me. I think alhamdulillah, that's a sign maybe to say that maybe I did do something right.
MashaAllah, that's really beautiful, sis. And it just shows, it reminds me of the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, how in the end, like even the most difficult people, can come round, situations can change, and we just have to have, that hope in Allah, and Allah will, make a way for us. So Jazakallah khair for sharing that.
Inshallah. It's interesting you say that because my son's called Yusuf.
Oh,
Fahmeeda,
yeah.
what I also wanted to share, what I've been thinking about recently is, you teach our children so many things, of course, and the youngsters around us, how to help them, how to walk, how to talk, how to eat, how to get dressed themselves. But we sort of don't think about this emotional, mindful intelligence that we need to share as well. So my niece is just over 1 year old, and she's starting to say no to things. Or every time her toy gets taken away, she'll start crying. And what I realized is that's the early state of emotions. Just like how we waddle when we first learn to walk, like these are the early phases, these are the early stages. Refining, they need strengthening, they need developing. And so her, crying when she has a toy taken away, or crying when somebody refuses to do something for her, that's the early phases. And so that all needs work, and I think what we tend to do is like, this one's so stubborn, or this one's so selfish, or this one's so clingy. It's not that at all. These are the early phases of development. And just like we're helping them develop all these other skills, motor skills and physical skills, we need to help the children develop in these skills as well, and recognize that it's just a part of development. It's not, because I think we start labeling from a very, very early age. This one's stubborn, this one's clingy, this one's this one's that. It's just them trying to learn their emotions.
Yeah. And we actually, without realizing, we actually discourage them from sharing their emotions. We have such problems like sharing how we feel. Those boundaries.
We start saying, don't say no. Well, actually, she's only saying no because she's not happy. We need to deal with her. We need to get that out of her, or that child out of them. What's upsetting about this? Okay, so maybe you can do it like this, or obviously there's only one now, you can't do it at that age, but it is part of the process. You need to understand that You know, we need to let them cry and allow them that space to cry. What we tend to do, you know, why are you crying for? You know, you have to share. Well, no, she doesn't have to, but it's a skill.
That's it. Fahmeeda, thank you. And we've got one last comment. I'll just read that out as a question. Letting go is not that easy. Even with, alhamdulillah, faith and understanding, things don't go easy. In fact, things only get harder. My question, even having sabr, how does one control anger? When one knows you can hurt, but you don't. So your question is how to control anger. I'm just trying to think. Would you like to add anything else to that, sister, that asked that question? Jazakallah for, you know, sharing your question with us.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Sorry, I just talking of anger, I came across something recently, and it was about how to overcome anger. So I don't know if this would help the sister who asked that. Thought I'd quickly share it. Well, I was told every time I get really, really, really angry, I should just sit down, cross my legs, and kind of close my eyes and hold my breath in for as long as a minute if I can, just depending on how long you can hold it. And then imagine all the anger, gather it all up and blow it out. And then repeat that about 5 times.
So really, has that helped you?
Yeah, that's helped me loads, especially in like difficult relationships, and sometimes rage and anger from past traumas can come up, and it can cause triggers and whatnot. So that's been a huge help, and I just thought quickly add that in. Sorry, I'm out of breath. I was cleaning my room and I had a loudspeaker, so I just thought quickly step in.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And I think there's, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but when we're angry, there's a hadith that we should, if we're standing, we should sit down, and if we're sitting down, then we should lie down. And that sounds like, you know, the advice that you've just shared. So, you know, back to the sunnah of what to do. So, you know, we can make wudu when we're feeling angry. And I think anger, we have to really, like Dr. Amina said, the first step is to understand where that anger is coming from. And if we are feeling, if it's an overreaction to something that's happening in the present moment, then that anger isn't actually just for that, what's happening in front of you now. That's probably anger that you've been carrying around for a long time, and it's kind of exploding when it has the opportunity. So it's knowing where that anger kind of started from and why you're holding on to that anger. So maybe it's something, you know, you want to work on and you know, unpick a bit more and see what, you know, what comes up. But we all, you know, we all have anger in us, and Allah created anger, and anger has a purpose as well. And, you know, we can shame that anger. Obviously, any emotion on either extreme, not to be angry at all, you know, that would, you know, a lot of, you know, the purpose of anger is that when there's wrong, that we can stop. You know, we use that anger, it's like a motivation for us to stop wrong from happening. So, you know, there's, when we balanced in that anger, you know, this is the anger that, you know, that is justified, that Allah has created for us. But when we become extreme in our anger, then this is, you know, from shaitan. And this is what, you know, when you're angry, you know, taking deep breaths, you know, saying, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem, this is really good. You know, like the sister said, you know, taking a breath, inhaling, holding that, and then exhaling and holding that, and just making that into, you know, a regular habit. And the more aware you become of your anger, so what kind of signals are you feeling in your body? Is your heart racing? Is your body sweating? You know, is your voice changing? So when the earlier you can catch yourself in a state of anger, the quicker that you can kind of troubleshoot that. So it is, you know, it's awareness and, you know, taking it from there.
So yeah, Fahmeeda, can I add to that as well?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I think in the beginning when you ask what makes a bad relationship, one of the sisters said expectations. I think that's linked to control, and a lot of the times when you feel anger, it's a sign that you don't want to control the situation because it's not going the way you want it to go. And I think when you're feeling those feelings, you need to really analyze and ask yourself, is it a situation I can control to influence it in a good way, or is it a situation where I can't control because I've got no control over it? And therefore, are these feelings of anger, something that I can actually realize that that's something I can dissipate because I know it's nothing I can do about it. Do you understand where I'm coming from? So
Yeah.
I understand. So checking what is the reason why I'm angry. Is it because I have a need for control over people? Or, what is the feeling? Why am I feeling like this? I think it's really important to understand that.
Yeah, definitely. And again, it could be due to a deeper underlying issue. Maybe you felt out of control at a certain time in your life, and now you feel the need to be over controlling. And mashallah, it's really good, sis, that you're aware of this, and you want to work on it. So you've set that intention for yourself, and inshallah Allah will help you with that. Allah make it easy for you and everybody. I mean, so if nobody else has anything to say, I'm going to just share one last hadith that ties in really nicely. So be mindful of Allah and you will find him before you. If you ask from Allah. If you seek help from Allah. Know that if the nations gathered together to benefit you, they could not benefit you unless Allah has decreed it for you. And if the nations gathered together to harm you, they could not harm you unless Allah has decreed it for you. The pens have been lifted and the pages have dried. So, this really shows that, we don't, everything is decreed. Like, how much control do we have? Even in our relationships, we have control over ourselves to be mindful and to be good in the relationship. But like this hadith says that, even the beneficial relationships, even that can't benefit you unless Allah decreed it for you. And the relationships that negatively impact you can't harm you unless Allah has decreed that for you. So I'm going to end there, inshallah. Jazakallah khair, sisters, for joining me. Inshallah, see you next week with another coach. So subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.